Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Alexa and I'm a first year PA student at McMaster University in Ontario, Canada. Welcome to part 2 of my MMI series. Today I'm going to be talking all about ethical questions that you could be asked in your MMI. This is one of the notorious different types of MMI questions that you could be asked. So today we're going to discuss all about ethical questions to hopefully give you guys a better idea of how to tackle them. So if you are interested, then just keep watching. So I'll first start off by talking a little bit about what ethical questions are. So ethical questions are questions where they give you a certain type of scenario and they ask what you would do. And these scenarios are very complex to navigate. They're not easy. They have different kind of challenges within them. And so you want to kind of approach these in a systematic way to make sure that your answer is comprehensive and you're covering all bases. So what I want to do is talk about a specific ethical scenario. I'll give an example of a classic ethical question, and I'll talk a little bit about the different points that you should hit in those answers, and that way you can apply those concepts to other ethical scenarios. So hopefully that gives you guys a better idea of essentially how to approach these things. So I'll use the classic example of a patient needs a blood transfusion, but they are a Jehovah's Witness. So Jehovah's Witnesses cannot receive blood transfusions based on their religious beliefs, and so it presents an ethical dilemma. So they might ask you in this question, what would you do, right? So we'll talk about the different components of how I would break down this answer, and that way you can apply those components to future ethical scenarios that you might encounter. And the example will also help solidify how to approach future questions as well. So the first thing that I would do whenever you're tackling an ethical scenario is acknowledge that the situation is difficult. Literally say that this is a very difficult situation to navigate, and it's very tricky and it's very complex. Acknowledging that is very important in the beginning because it tells them that you know that this is not an easy task. The second thing I would do is make sure that you don't act on any assumptions. So for example, in the Jehovah's Witness example, maybe that patient isn't actually a Jehovah's Witness. You want to make sure that you confirm on that patient's file that they are in fact a Jehovah's Witness, and you can't give them blood products. You want to make sure that there was no mix-up with the patient file. Always want to make sure that you're not acting on any assumptions. Confirm all of the information that you are given is actually true. My third tip would be use an if-then approach. If the situation were to go in this direction, this is what I would do. So for example, maybe the Jehovah's Witness who needs the blood transfusion is actually able to tell you that they want the blood transfusion. Maybe that treatment is life-saving for them, and maybe when they understand and acknowledge that, they actually want to receive the blood transfusion. And if that's the case, you would respect what the patient wants and you would give the blood transfusion, right? If the patient is not able to respond to you and they absolutely need the blood transfusion, you would ultimately have to respect the patient's autonomy, and the fact that they are a Jehovah's Witness would prohibit them from getting the blood transfusion because that's not something that they want. So even though you have to withhold this life-saving procedure, you have to respect what that patient wants, and that wouldn't be blood products. As you can see, we went through multiple different avenues here to talk about what we would do in that question and the outcome and what our decision would be. What we would do changes depending on previous information, so you want to explore all of those avenues with any kind of ethical situation that you get in the future as well. Another thing to note just about the Jehovah's Witness question is how you act can change based on if the patient is a young child or if the patient is someone who can comprehend the outcomes of not receiving the blood transfusion. So you want to make sure that you look that up based on what the current laws and regulations in Canada are. The next point I want to make is that it's very important for you to make sure that you demonstrate an understanding of all of the stakeholders' perspectives. So for example, as a clinician, you want to do the best that you can to make sure that you are able to stabilize the patient, to prevent them from death if that is unfortunately a possibility. But you also have to remember the implications on this person. If you do decide to give them a blood transfusion, this person could be excluded from their religious community. What effect would that have on their mental health, on their relationships with other people? You have to take all of these different aspects into account and say that and demonstrate that to them, so that way they know that you're thinking about everyone in this situation. Another thing I would mention is any available resources that you have to you use. So for example, you will rarely be making a big ethical decision like this on your own in healthcare, you will always be consulting a colleague or members of your team who might be more experienced than you. So you want to mention that. You want to say, I will consult another colleague about this to get more advice and work in a team. Other resources that you can use are mental health counselors, religious leaders, things like that. And basically what this will do is will tell the program administrators that you have an understanding that you will not be tackling these issues alone, and there's always other people to turn to and other people to get involved in the situation that will help you navigate it in a more effective way. Another thing that I want to mention that I briefly touched upon earlier is in these ethical scenarios, a lot of them do require that you have medical ethics knowledge. So for example, you also should look into topics like medical assistance in dying and laws and regulations around that. So you do need to come prepared with that knowledge in advance in order to tackle these different ethical situations. Another thing I will mention that doesn't necessarily go with this scenario, but something to mention in general, anything that is illegal, you need to report. So maybe you have a situation where you suspect a child is being abused. You as a clinician or any other person in any scenario have an obligation to make sure that that child is protected. But again, with those kinds of ethical situations, don't act on assumptions. So maybe you're a clinician and you're examining a child, you want to make sure that the wounds that they have on their body are consistent with child abuse. Maybe the kid just fell off their bike, as many kids do, right? So you want to make sure that anything that you're suggesting, you back up and you give a reason why. So for example, maybe you already checked the wounds and you found that they were consistent to physical abuse, then you would need to report that. My last tip is to give just like a general summary statement at the end about what you would do. So again, you want to summarize your if-then approaches. You also want to mention some of the resources that you talked about, and your summary should be like very concise, definitely under 30 seconds, just to give them a little bit of a recap of what you would do. And that kind of just like ties the bow on the end of your answer. It just makes it look a little bit more complete. So overall, that's how I would go through the different ethical questions. Again, based on how much time they give you, you might need to make this more concise, but I would say it's very important to use the if-then approach, explore multiple avenues of how the situation could go to give them an understanding of you're not going to act impulsively, you're not going to act irrationally, you're going to be logically thinking about the multiple different outcomes that could happen, and you're going to be using resources to help you navigate the situation. It's really, really important that you demonstrate that. And it's also important to keep in mind the time that you have to complete your answer. Every school will have a different amount of time that you can spend speaking, so be aware of that, and they actually might not even tell you how much time they're going to give you. When you're in the MMI, be cognizant and include the most important things. Make your answer a little bit more concise if you are a little bit tighter on time. Yeah, so I think that's all for this one. I hope this was helpful for you guys. If you are enjoying these kinds of MMI videos, let me know. I plan on doing more in the future about different types of MMI questions. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this one. Definitely subscribe and turn your post notifications on if you want to be notified when I make my next video. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.